Flexbox vs CSS-Grid. Now, why do we even need to talk about these two, and why are not more? Now, why are there just two? Why are there not only one, and so on and so forth? Now, I think before we get into even talking about these two, we can talk about what's been before and what you will hear when you get out there in the world. Now, CSS came quite shortly after HTML, as you know, from previous lectures. But very early on, it was always to, make scientific documents. There was really the purpose of it. It was simple word-based looking design. Scientific documents are not too fun to look at sometimes. So it really tried to deal with the issues that scientific documents they deal with. And that was the very purpose of CSS, to make them look like that. Now, since the HTML was so easy to use and for many, and it was really smart built and semantically it was good. It was really a smart language, all in all. It got used, and people needed to visualize things, even though they used HTML for different things than scientific documents. So they needed to use CSS. They needed to visualize things. So what we early on saw was that when you try to hack things, or not hack in the sense that you're breaking into something, they're misusing CSS to be able to create web design. So the very first thing you see is actually people using something called table-based design. And if you go back in time and look at table-based design for web, you will see what I'm talking about. If you're as old as me or older, you probably remember when things looked like that, and it was so standardized that, and no one criticized it because that was the only thing we had. And table-based design is usually you create an HTML table, everything and then you put all the elements within these tables. So you create, sort of spaces where you put HTML content inside. It is extremely unresponsive. So it's not responsive at all. You cannot work with any different screen size and so on. So you're locked in with that size, and you can have slight deviations to it, but not too much. And it worked well with the kind of CT screens we had back in the days. Now, if you then, wind forward and you play forward and you see that we get these mobile devices that suddenly goes from being able to play Worm on it until you play, or not Worm, it's Snake, it's called. You can start to play Tetris, you can play funny things over there. And then you go to be able to suddenly go into Alta Vista or whatever the search engine you were in, and you can look at web pages, even though it was quite slow back then, and you really had to think about the bandwidth of the phone, and it costed money, a lot of money. So at that point, you could visit website, and companies had to take that into consideration. They needed things to look good on the phone as well, even though I believe nothing could look good in the phone at that time. But certainly, table-based design was not the solution. And we got all of these flat screens. We got larger screens because of that. We could build more because of these flat screens. So we get different screen sizes to a larger degree than we had before. Taking all that into consideration, we really need to think about table-based design. We cannot have it anymore. So we try to hack, in a sense, CSS in a different way. We use something else that has been available for us, something called float. Float is basically something we use to really place images to the left or to the right or in the center of text. So when and we want the text to flow around it. And that is the only or almost only purpose of float. But then we use something called float techniques to to use it with many other contexts, which I would say was horrible. But that is what I grew up with. I had to use that thing to work with responsive web design. Some people still like it. I don't understand why. You had to every time you did something, it affected the normal flow, so everything collapsed, and you have to re, make something called a clear fix to save it, and it was like a lot of additional code just to get this working, and it wasn't as responsive as you would like it to be. So you, people didn't like it, but we had nothing else to use to adapt for the new devices. And then a Flexbox, by then, since it was web was no longer had no longer for a long time been used for scientific documents as the sole purpose, it had been used for so many other things. CSS and the developers behind that, they had been purposely thinking about and creating a new system called Flexbox. So that should address these issues and totally remove the need for ever using float in that wrongful sense that we talked about earlier. And that was when we got Flexbox. And I don't remember perfectly which date it was. I think could have been like 2011, or maybe it's 2005. It doesn't really matter. It's way back anyway. And Flexbox got really everyone started to use it early on. It's like being in the desert for 10 years or 15 years, and then suddenly being given water. People were crazy about it. So, and it really solved a lot of issues for us. Um, Working with responsive design went from being a really hellish task to being something really enjoyable with Flexbox. So, why do we have CSS-Grid? Now, when you work with something and it starts to get enjoyable, you're going to try more and more things. And we could even imagine trying things that we never had imagined before just with Flexbox, and we encountered more issues, especially talking about multidimensionality. And that is also the next slide. The next slide is going to show you an image here about multidimensionality and what we're talking about. Usually, when you're thinking about a screen, there are actually two dimensions to it. We have width and we have a height. Flexbox work with one direction at a time. So it's usually you can stack things in both horizontally and vertically in Flexbox, and you can do so and wrap so that they jump on different road. But the really purpose of Flexbox is working one dimensionally. Now, with web and design and everything else expanding and so on, we found that to be a limitation for us. So we wanted to work in both direction, both height and width at the same time, to be able to set that from, and then therefore CSS-Grid was invented. We also have something that both of these two brought to the table, which was new, and we could from the parent. We were talking about HTML and we said parent, sibling, or child. And usually, before Flexbox came, we had to handle the styling of each individual element. And we did that by placing the style on that element. So the way size of something or the way it was handled in relation to others was always assigned to the element. Now I can assign a lot of values to the parent, and the parent then automatically handles its children, which means I can write code in one place instead of on many children. I can write it on the parent. So the parent has more control. And both Flexbox and CSS-Grid has that, but CSS-Grid has even more of that. So I'm going to just look into this. And since this is an introduction to Flexbox and CSS-Grid, and you will have a lesson later on, which firmly delves into these two. I'm not going to make this example a very large one, but it's a necessary one to really understand and get a grips of what we're talking about. Let's go to Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code, when you first encounter it, it might look like this, or maybe you could close an untitled page, which is up there, and just close it because it usually opens one up automatically. I'm going to just go into File, and I'm going to open up a folder. Now I'm going to create one. So let's go to Desktop for me, and I'm going to just create a new folder. Let's say something. This is just done for you, so you can know repeat doing these things. Let's call this lecture, and you make an underscore. Maybe I should also keep this very good practice. Keep everything in small caps. So a lecture, and instead of using a space, I use an underscore. This is good practice. And then I'll call this LT, standing for layout techniques. Lecture layout techniques. So I don't have to write all of that. It's down there. Now I choose that folder. It opens up. And of course, now I can see the lecture LT up here. I can't see the full name, but if I expand it, you see it's lecture LT. The whole thing is still empty. We have no files in it. So let's go and make a file. We'll create a new file. And let's make this call this one index.html. And I also want to just type HTML. And if I do that, I get this emmet abbreviation, which is called HTML:5. I can just click on it, and I get the bare minimum. And that's all I want to do for now. And then I want to create a link. And let's create this link to something. Yeah, I go with just write a link and then saying CSS, and then going to assume something called style CSS is going to be next to this. I can do that as well. So just create a style just next to. Usually you have styles in a separate folder, but it really doesn't matter right now. So there you go. Index, and then we have styles. Both of them are there. I think it's good practice to actually just do these things so we can all get used to working with the Visual Studio Code. So this is just an empty screen. We have nothing in it. We don't have to style this a lot either. Either we can just start by making a div. I'm using div here, not because it's good practice. It's because I have no content. So I have nothing to care about. I just want to visualize something for you. I'm making a div, and in that div, I'm going to just write the class of flex. And then let's create an additional div. And let's call this one class of item. So now this is and this is actually the relation. We were talking about flex. That's a flex parent, and this is a flex container, we call it, and flex item. So an item is the one inside the parent. Or you can just call this the flex parent, and this is the flex child. No. And then let's just make a p element inside, and we give this the value 1. I'm going to make 3 of these. Copy them. You can do it any way you want. I did it that way, which is what way you say. I'm going to show you when I'm making the CSS grid just below here. So I'm using tab a lot. Tab is auto-completing things for me. So that's a good thing to do. But then I'd use other things as well. For example, I can make something called an emmet. So let's say I want to maybe I've done this before. You don't have to yell at me if I have. But if I, for example, want to write a UL, and no, I don't, but you write a UL and LI, I can now say how many, and I can type, I can do this. It says basically, I'm going to create a UL element with an li element in, and I'm going to make 5 of them. Now it's going to be 5 UL li element inside, which is cool. I could do similar things here with div. I don't know if I can do exactly this, but I can try. So let's say if I did div, and then I write a dot, which signifies class, and then I write within that, which is this one. I'll write div with a dot of dot and an item. I could also go ahead now and type something else. I could do, we got p's inside, right? So first I go that times 3. And within each of those, I want a p. I don't know if this is way too complex for me to know if I've never used it like this, but I think this means if I press enter now, yeah, cool. And it also know that I need to fill this one in, so I can write 1 and then tab, goes to the next 2 and 3. And now I have written the same thing. And if you learn these emits, you can write code quite quickly, as I know. We can also now, of course, you can see this. I wrote flex there. I should have written grid. This is just common class names for me right now to make you distinguish between what is the flex and what is the grid item. And you will see something very similar being done in a larger context when I introduce this in the lesson. But for now, this is what we need. And then we are going to work with this inside of styles as well. So let's create them. I'm using the dot to say I actually handle a class. And then we are going to say, yeah, perfect. It knew I wanted to do that. So let's do this. I think it's me having something called codium, which really, yeah, okay, I want that. So it is an AI assistant that knows what I want before I know it. It really doesn't help me write code. It just helped me write the code quicker, faster. So this is Flex Grid. You have these. Let's see what happens if I make this one a bit smaller here to the left. There you go. I can keep the other one smaller, and I can go with go live. It's going to pop up somewhere. Yeah, you go. And of course, it's going to be really hard to see what I'm doing. So let's see. It's 1, 2, 3, and it's 1, 2, 3. It's very small up there to the left corner of the screen. So I'm going to make all of them larger, or I zoom on them. Now you can see there are like 1, 2, 3. They are standing just next to each other when the Flexbox, and these are just below one another. Right now, the only thing that is different between these two is the one is stacking automatically on a row, and one is automatically statically on top of one another, like blocks like this. And in fact, if I had no display flexes on at all, if I save, you will see that they are basically doing the same thing. The only thing now different is there more distance between the grid items. So the natural state of things is usually to be stacking on top of one another when they are block level elements like these are. So if this doesn't tell you much about these two, and of course the lecture is going to really handle it, but the dimensionality of this, talking about there being 2 directions, that is something I really want to address in this case. It depends on how many dimensions the parent can handle simultaneously. And Flexbox can handle 1, and Grid can handle 2. So Grid can handle both width and height at the same time. Flexbox cannot layout. So I can in Flex say the flex direction is either column, which makes it look very much like the other one, or row. Or I can, of course, do this in row in reverse, which means I get everything under one direction, which is rarely done, but they are already available for me. But it's either horizontally or vertically stacked. And then, of course, if I want to, I can also make things go whenever the row doesn't fit anymore, it wraps on the next line. So I can get a row going from 1, 2, 3 to 1,000 over here, and then it suddenly at 800 it knows it doesn't really fit anymore, and then it starts on 801 on the next row. So that is perfectly possible, but still everything is stacking only in the row direction. Now display grid is not like that. You can work with something called, for example, let's make this very simple. I can make something called grid template columns, or which means now I'm going to write, let's say I write 5 values, which you know. I'm never going to use pixels for this, but I'm doing it right now to make it easy. And then I can use grid template rows and on the same. And let's say I write them as 25 pixels. 25 pixels. What I've done here is basically I've gone back to something called a table-based design. You know, I mentioned it earlier, but the table-based design I used in the 90s and at the beginning of the 2000s, I used that by using HTML elements, which means I was locked to keeping these HTML elements, and we did them, which was totally unresponsive. But right now, since I can shift this over to CSS and handle the table from the CSS and not enter it as hard-coded HTML, I get the full, use of using things like thinking in tables, thinking about spaces, like if there were a big grid similar to an Excel table or something like that. And I'm saying I'm going to place this and this cell and this in these cells, and this is going to span more cells than one. I can do that. So what I've done here is actually basically created a table with 3 columns. Now they're equal size, could be different sizes, and 2 rows. Now I can place items within them. So if I save now, automatically these knows it's going to be placed within these. Well, let's say I don't have all that many rows and columns. I save. Now it automatically knows that the next cell that is available is down there. And I can also now actually handle how many of these are going to be placed on if I want to. I could say that it's going to be spanning both of them. Exactly like I do when I work with Excel. For example, if I open Excel right now to just make an example, because examples are a beautiful thing, I'll go in here. And the first thing we created was something very similar to this. I'm going to create these. I'm going to make the borders very thick so they can be seen. And I think you can all now see these. There's and that's what I did from the very beginning. I had 50 over here. And then if I want to, I could go and say, let's have 1, 2, 3, and let's have a 4. I could say that 4 is going to be spanning the whole thing, or spanning just these. So I can make something very dynamic like this, and I'm going to change that. I can change that up and be dynamic through different screen sizes and resolutions, and it gives me an ultra possibility of working with 2 dimension at the same time with as little code as possible. Flexbox does not give that possibility, but still Flexbox excel at other things. And you'll see that in the lecture. So I really implore you to look at the lecture immediately after. No, sorry. Look at the lesson immediately after this one, because I have a lesson on just this. So if I have said lecture before, please disregard that when I'm saying this is the lecture. The lesson is the other one where I actually go through Flexbox and CSS-Grid more in depth than I do during this introduction to it. So with that said, I think we're ready to skip into the next video, and I'm quite sure that in the next video we'll be talking about what grid systems. Perfect, just as I expected. So I'll see you there.